Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Arsenal strolled to a 3-1 win in this London derby as they ensured that they kept up the pressure on City. Arsenal was several levels clear of a haphazard Chelsea, but how exactly did Arteta's tactics take advantage of Chelsea's right-hand side in particular? Let's take a look. And Arsenal lined up in their usual shape, with Zinchenko inverting alongside Jorginho to give Xhaka a little more freedom to push up into the half space alongside Odegaard, whilst Jesus and Trossard showed a lot of variability as they could rotate throughout the 90. And what Chelsea wanted to do defensively was obvious from the outset. They were looking to either pressure the centre-backs or keep things fairly even in the midfield through their use of Kante and Aubameyang in both cases. They wanted to, at times, be able to pressure the centre-backs 2 versus 2 by pushing Kante high alongside Aubameyang. However, in scenarios like this, they were wary of being outnumbered 4 versus 2 due to Arsenal's midfield box. Or if Xhaka and Odegaard were operating much higher, their back 4 backline could then be outnumbered, so Lampard had to find a way to look to counteract this. The way he looked to do this was, for the most part, keeping Kante and Aubameyang deeper to tie up the double pivot of Zinchenko and Jorginho, allowing Kovacic and Fernandes to drop off slightly deeper. In addition, with Odegaard and Xhaka often operating slightly wider in these half spaces, the wingers were then tasked with operating extremely narrow, either in more of a 4-4-2 like this, looking to cut out the initial pass to the men in the half spaces, or actually operating in a more man-oriented manner and looking to stay tight to their man. Here we see that front two of Aubameyang and Kante looking to operate on the Arsenal pivots, whilst at the same time Sterling and Madueke are operating much more narrow, and Sterling here is able to cut out the passing lane into Odegaard, whilst Madueke is picking up Xhaka in a more man-oriented manner as he is more penetrating with his movement. But this shape is where problems began to emerge for Chelsea, particularly down their right-hand side, as Arsenal's left-hand side began to take over the game. Trossard, or Jesus if they had rotated, tended to hold their width or operate even deeper and wider, and Chelsea's defense could be man-oriented at times, meaning that Azpilicueta would be dragged towards his man into these deeper regions, and what that would mean is a large gap between Azpilicueta and his right centre-back Fofana. And as we've seen throughout this season, Xhaka does not hesitate to make runs into the half space in order to give Arsenal additional passing options. So what this would mean is that Madueke, a natural winger, would have a great defensive responsibility to look to keep an eye on Xhaka and follow him deep whenever he made these runs. Here's one such situation where he does so, because as we can see, Trossard immediately spots the opportunity to go deep and wide, and Azpilicueta follows this movement, and Xhaka immediately looks to move into the gap created. But on this occasion, he keeps an eye on him well. But Madueke is a natural winger, and Xhaka recognized that Azpilicueta was spending a lot of time out wide in this position, so rather than forming the box, he could at times spend long periods in the half space creating that front 5. And what this would mean is that Madueke, if he was to be completely disciplined, would be spending a lot of time deep, almost in a right centre-back position, which of course isn't his natural game. So throughout the 90, we did see moments when Xhaka was able to get away from his man and get into dangerous positions. We see again here that Azpilicueta is operating outside of Madueke, and Xhaka identifies the space. And this time when he made the run, Madueke had his eyes forward, so Xhaka is able to receive the pass from Zinchenko, dragging Fofana across and creating potential for crosses. This dynamic was made even more effective by Arsenal due to the movement of the centre forward, as both Jesus and Trossard are comfortable moving deeper. So what we would often see when Xhaka was making these runs is that the forward would be making a movement in the opposite direction. So if Madueke followed, Jesus could potentially pick up in this region. Or if the centre-back followed the movement of the centre-forward, there was now a bigger gap created in the defensive section. Same situation once again, Azpilicueta being dragged wide, Madueke initially on Xhaka, and Jesus is up front. As Xhaka begins to make the run in behind, Jesus comes towards the ball, dragging Fofana with him, meaning that now Madueke is covering in this extremely unnatural position. But it was in the deeper controlled build-up that Arsenal truly took advantage of Chelsea's shape. Initially, with Zinchenko tying up Conte, what we could see when they shifted to more of a 3 was Gabriel finding space outside of the pressing shape due to Madueke being on Xhaka and Trossard tying up Azpilicueta as we have discussed. However, Gabriel does not have the best passing range, meaning he could not fully take advantage of the situation. So what we began to see was Arsenal looking to exaggerate this left-hand side overload, with one or both of Xhaka and Zinchenko often looking to move wide, especially if Conte was dragged towards the man on the ball. Zinchenko and Xhaka could move into these regions, and if Madueke was following his man and Azpilicueta was still man-oriented on the winger, this could now create space for a man on the outside, so now there was a 3 versus 2. And this, of course, would lead to the potential of a man being found on the outside, getting into dangerous positions for crosses. Here we see Zinchenko, Xhaka, Trossard and Jesus all moving towards the left-hand side. And with Conte having one eye on the centre-back, Zinchenko can receive, and he has much more ability with the ball at his feet than Gabriel in the previous example. But of course, the best example is the first goal. And here we have Xhaka, Zinchenko, Jesus and Trossard higher up, all on the left-hand side. So now with Conte having had one eye on Gabriel and ending up covering Jesus, that same 3 versus 2 advantage is created against Madueke and Azpilicueta, meaning Zinchenko can receive the first pass. So now Madueke was covering Zinchenko, meaning Xhaka becomes a free man, as Azpilicueta has his eyes on the winger Trossard. So Azpilicueta follows his man, freeing up Xhaka on the flanks to receive. And his cross, of course, leads to the Odegaard goal. Similarly for the second, we have Conte picking up the centre-back, meaning that we once again have a wider triangle of Gabriel, Jesus, Zinchenko and Xhaka. Zinchenko draws Madueke, so Xhaka can receive in the space, as Fernandes had been looking to cover Jorginho. And we can see that Azpilicueta still follows the widest man, meaning Fofana is dragged across with the dropping Trossard. So with Madueke high, Xhaka gets a little bit more space than usual, making the run in the half space. And again keeps this space, allowing him to cross to Odegaard once again. But of course, this left-hand side overload could force Chelsea to overcompensate and move most of their team to their right. And especially with the wingers having been tasked on covering the man in the half spaces, Sterling would also be drawn narrow on Odegaard. And Chilwell would often look to back this up to prevent Odegaard having an easy run through the half space. This would then free up the switch to Saka for a potential 1v1 backed up by White looking to overlap from deep. We see that Chelsea have moved numbers across to deal with this overload, while Sterling has eyes on Odegaard making the run through the half space. So Zinchenko looks for the switch. Saka is able to receive, and because both Chilwell and Sterling are drawn across, Odegaard can make the run through the half space. A similar example, except this time it's Gabriel who's on the ball, and once again he looks for the switch. But it's not as crisp as Zinchenko's switch, and Odegaard was making the run through the half space, but it is intercepted. And this is just scratching the surface of the problems that Chelsea had with their defensive shape. What we also saw was that when the forwards looked to press the centre-backs in scenarios like this, it would force Fernandes and Kovacic to look to back up the press on the pivots. And when White got on the ball deeper, Sterling could at times be drawn towards his man. And what this would mean is now there was space between the lines where Arsenal could look to find the likes of Odegaard and Xhaka, who could then turn and be running at the defence, and time and again this led to extremely dangerous situations for Arsenal. So here we see Sterling being drawn towards White on the ball, and Kovacic had been higher looking to close down Jorginho, meaning that there's space for Odegaard between the lines, who can receive and then look to attack the backline. Overall, these two sides showed why they are where they are in the table, and Chelsea were poor not only tactically, but also on an effort and execution level, looking like players just waiting out the season. For the manager tactical scores, Arteta didn't even have to be great, but his left-hand side overloads worked perfectly, earning him a 7, while Chelsea's defensive shape left them completely vulnerable, earning Lampard a 2. But what are your thoughts? Drop them down below.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you might enjoy the content available on my Patreon. Not only does Patreon help to support the continued production of content, as I am a one-man team, but it also gives you early access to videos that will come on the channel. You'll also get exclusive videos, get to vote on polls, and so much more. And it's cheaper than ever, no longer having a tier system, so everyone on the Patreon gets access to all the content. so head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple to check it out.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.